Live.
Good evening. I'm Alderwoman Sheila Finlayson. I'd like to welcome you to our third and final town hall on the theme of where do we go from here? We've all heard the horror stories, and many of us have lived social injustices in our community, in our county, in our state, and in our country. The purpose of this town hall, as in previous town halls, is to gather ideas, suggestions, and strategies for dealing with racial injustices. During the first town hall, we heard from Mayor Buckley, two aldermen, Alderman Gay and Alderman Rodriguez. We heard from Police Chief Ed Jackson, from Carl Snowden from the Caucus of African American Leaders, from Jackie Alsop, the president of the NAACP, our local chapter, from Amy Cruz from the ACLU, and from the superintendent of schools, Dr. George Arlotto. We heard from community leaders, Dr. Charlestine Fairley, the CEO for the Community Action Agency, and Mr. Andre Dillard, the principal of Georgetown East and a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. The NAACP, our local chapter. During the second town hall, we heard ideas from different elected leaders, from Alderman Ross Arnett and Rob Savage. We heard from community leaders, Rob Levitt and Naz Afi. We heard from the education perspective from Jeff McCree and from Rising Junior, I guess she's now a junior at Annapolis High School, Miss Kayla Golder. I'm pleased to introduce you to our participants for this town hall. Most of our participants this evening came to Annapolis by choice. They bring ideas and strategies that have been created and or experienced elsewhere. They all bring a more global approach to the question of where we go from here. This evening, I am joined by two of my colleagues, actually only one of my colleagues will be making it this evening, Mr. Alderman Fred Payon, who is a native Annapolitan and who served, I believe, all of his tenure as a prosecutor in the state's attorney's office. We have Mr. Harold Lloyd, fondly known as Mo, who has been directly involved in Black Lives Matter and who is a community organizer for the youth and the not so young. We have Pastor Patricia Johnson, the pastor of Mount Zion United Methodist Church, my church, 2nd Street in Eastport, and of Fowler's United Methodist Church in Bestgate. I'm also joined by Dr. Irving McConnell. Dr. McConnell is the founder of the McConnell Group, which focuses on biomedical research and biodefense research support services. He's a Bronze Star recipient and a leader in community activities here in Annapolis and elsewhere. And to round out our panel this evening, we have Mr. Nathaniel Harrington, a native Annapolitan who now resides in Florida. Mr. Harrington is a retired television journalist, a high school teacher, public relations executive, and the CEO of the National Strategic Partnership, LLC, and the author of a new book, How to Launch Your Career in 7 Steps. Before I pose the question, just a reminder to those of you who are at home listening that this is an opportunity to ask questions of our participants. But I'm going to ask that you hold your questions until all of our participants have had an opportunity to speak. You can go to the city webpage, you can go to YouTube, or you can go to Facebook to access our program this evening and to ask questions. So as we get started, and before our guests begin to answer that question on where we go from here, I'd like to call on Will Rowell, my partner in crime in this venture, to give us a little update on where we've been. Will?
Hello, and thank you all, esteemed panelists, and thank you, City of Annapolis, those who are watching today's broadcast. very timely conversation about race equity, in particular in the city of Annapolis, but obviously across our entire nation. It's a very timely conversation. So what Alderwoman Finlayson has asked me to do is kind of provide context as to where and how we got exactly where we are now, contextually, that is. Although there are many different stories about the city of Annapolis on all sides of the city of Annapolis, there are some factual things we do know about conversations and experiences as it relates to race equity. So one of the persons I relied on greatly as a colleague, but also just in general in terms of the history of African Americans in Annapolis is Janice Hayes Williams. And she posed a few things in looking at the history and trajectory of African Americans in the city of Annapolis. And I'll begin in like the 50s. And one of those things was the idea that in Annapolis, the African American community, I'll refer to them as the Black community in Annapolis, thrived. There was an awakening in that community in terms of the fight for inclusion. And the word we also use for that, of course, is the fight for equity. It embraced Brown versus Board of Education, which was the U.S. Supreme Court's decision ending legal segregation in the school system. During this period, also the Black community was united around fraternal organizations and social organizations, which were extremely influential in the African American community. Organizations such as the Legionnaires, the Elks, the Daughters of the Elks, the Masons, the Eastern Star, the Lynx, the Frontiers, and professional organizations, comprised of educators like Phi Delta Kappa and AKAs or Alpha Kappa Alphas, as well as, a plethora of other fraternal and sorority organizations from HBCUs and elsewhere. So during the 50s, there were significant gains, as I said, towards that. What you did see at that exact same time is, remembering that the Anne Arundel Medical Center didn't exist, and we had the hospital downtown. And before this time, at this hospital, African-American women were not allowed to give birth to their children in that hospital. And during this time, since, the first time that happened, Black doctors were allowed to practice at that hospital in an area where they lived. So you had Dr. Raymond L. Richardson, who was first, who was then followed by Dr. Theodore Hyde Johnson. You had Dr. Aris T. Allen, as well as his wife, Dr. Faye Allen. And then in the 70s, it brought about also considerable change because even though there was that cultural explosion, and we did have very, very, very powerful and institutionalized Black churches in the city of Annapolis, we also saw the advent of something called urban renewal, also referred to as urban removal. And what this did is it removed Black residents from along Larkin Street and some other areas in Annapolis to housing authorities. And it moved them to what's called public housing at a time when our communities were experiencing what the entire nation was experiencing, which is somewhat of a depression or a economic downturn. And what it did is it moved them to the outskirts of the city, and remembering that there was no public transportation, adequate public transportation to deliver them to jobs in order to maintain economic viability, but also remembering in a lot of these communities, you had deserts, you had food deserts, but you also had a lack of commercial industry. And remembering as we had this conversation, when we talk about race equity, particularly in the city of Annapolis, is we must constantly remember and also reframe the narrative that there were commerce centers, there were thriving African-American businesses, and there were leaders in our community who were property owners, as well as police officers. We had an African-American police chief, Chief Johnson, and that ushered in a lot of other things in our communities that land us where we are today. Now, I think my time is up, but I did want to give an update about what's been happening around this area. So one of them is the Affordable Housing Task Force, and that has been headed by Alderman Dewan Gay, and that focuses on really evaluating current programs and initiatives that produce new housing opportunities for people who live in this city. What we do know is disproportionately African Americans in the city of Annapolis are engaged in situations where they're not practicing ownership. And what that means is that creates an entirely different dynamic when we talk about equity as it relates to housing. On Saturday, September 19th, they're having a 1,000-man march. And my belief is that this march will create an opportunity to elevate some of our concerns and some of the conversation around equity, but also around Black lives. One of the other thing we do know, and I wanted to announce this, is that we do know that evictions in the city of Annapolis, in our county, and nationally have been an issue. That produces a housing crisis, and we are paying attention to that. The city, our older persons, all of them are actively involved in having these conversations about housing and how to ease the trauma that's caused by evictions. On August 31st, August 31st, we had an overdose awareness day. On this day, we talked about the opioid epidemic and the damage that it's had. Just really briefly, we've had 130 in 2020 so far. It's the beginning of September. And obviously, that is another pandemic. What we have done is focus a lot of, attention on some of the populations that are greatly affected by overdoses and fatalities. Unfortunately, a lot of those in the African-American community. I'm gonna rush right through this. We're working on a civilian review board in the city of Annapolis, which creates an opportunity for greater transparency, which equals accountability. And that actually, connects to the African-American community greatly as it relates to community policing, as well as trust. And lastly, I want to touch on the fact that we lost Robert Eads, who was a community activist, as well as an outspoken person who really represented how you elevate issues in the African-American community at City Hall and elsewhere. And he succumbed to COVID-19. And, we're all mourning that and incredibly sad about that. Our hope is that it encourages other people to step in and be an advocate and a champion for some of those issues at the community level. We also lost a 14-year-old young man by the name of Cameron Wallace, affectionately known as Peeboo, who we lost to gun violence in Annapolis Gardens. And, that brought about a lot of other really interesting changes and awareness in relation to how we're dealing with young people in our communities. So thank you for this time. I know it ran a little bit, but there's a lot more. I encourage you all, anyone watching, to access the city's Facebook page and the city's website, as well as your alderpersons, to find out what things are being done towards this area. So I want to thank you, Alderwoman.
Thank you, Will. The idea is, we've talked about and we've heard a lot of the problems that exist. Right. We've been talking about for a long time the problems. Right. You mentioned the death of a 14-year-old, which kind of brings it all home for us. And the purpose of these town halls was to move us beyond what is happening into what we can be doing. And you mentioned several different programs that are occurring in our community. The idea is to generate a plethora of long-term programs that will be sustainable in our community. Things that are not for a day or a week or a month, but that will help propel our community into a better place to therefore resolve, some of these very serious issues that we're addressing. And so here we are this evening, And we have, as I've said before, we have a list of community leaders and experts on the phone that are on the Zoom call this evening, all of whom I'm going to ask the same question. And that question is, knowing all of the problems and all of the social injustices that have occurred here and elsewhere, what is it that our city of Annapolis could and should be doing about it? You know, where do we go from here? And so I'm going to start with the youngest member of our panel this evening, Mr. Lloyd. And I hope you don't mind me calling you Mo, because I think that's what everybody calls you. Mo, you know, the young have led many of the protests in the city of Annapolis. We're the capital. We see every protest from every group come through at some point in time. And this year, we have seen more protests led by the young than ever before in the history that I recall. And I know you have been at the forefront of speaking about some of the problems, and I believe thinking about where we should go from here. So, Mr. Lloyd, I pose that question to you first. Where should we go from here?
Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Will, for telling me about this. So to start it off, you know, I think we all understand that we have to point out the issues, we have to point out the problems. But not only that, we also have to give the voiceless a voice. We also have to be representation for the underrepresented. And coming from Robinwood and living on Clay Street all my life, my peers and I, my family and I have been underrepresented. My family and I didn't have a voice. And growing up, I made sure that that would never happen again. So we have to really have the discussion that Annapolis is a city that is built off racism. 400 years of racism has been in Annapolis. Annapolis started with racism, and it's still racism going on today. And when we don't address the roots of the problem, well, that allows the problem to continue indefinitely until we do something about it. So when I'm thinking about the situations that I face today, it goes back to the fact I live on Clay Street, which is also known as the old Fourth Ward area, but it gets excluded from the Annapolis Historic District. Why is that? Why does all of these areas downtown Annapolis are involved in that historic district, but we don't get involved in that historic district? And as Will mentioned about public housing, well, isn't this history learning that College Creek Terrace was the second public housing nationally, the first one in the state of Maryland? Mm-hmm. And, you know, it played a pivotal role in the eminent domain that happened on Calvert and West Washington Street, where urban removal came through and it took Black families and Black businesses away, and they gave them petty change for their housing, their real estate, their businesses, and moved them on to the outskirts. And some of them moved to College Creek and public housing. We don't talk about the inequities that a lot of the families are facing here in Annapolis. We always talk about how can we empower the communities of color in Annapolis. Well, you cannot empower them just by telling them go vote. They also need economic advancement. And how can we advance these communities when these communities have been marginalized for decades? These communities have been stripped of their voices, their power, their land. How can we do that if we don't give them something? If we don't provide legislation for them to actually give them help, and we won't see any real change. The playing board hasn't been fair. It never was fair. So in order for us to make this playing board fair, we have to give them some type of legislation. We have to give them some type of help to boost them up in a fair playing field, because right now we're decades, maybe centuries behind. And we're trying to help us get back to that point of life where we felt as though that we were equal, even though America has showed us, the county has showed us, the state and the city has showed us, and they treated us like we were second-class citizens. So how can we change that in the future? And I think right now is the best time to do that, as we're watching the movements that are being led by the youth. Right now, we can actually bring real power because we're highlighting all of the issues that have been neglected neglected and pushed under the rug for so many years. Right now, we can bring that change. Right now, we can make legislation. Right now, we can turn Annapolis into a blueprint city where we don't have to look outside of the state in New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and say, well, you see these programs that they have here, let's bring them to Annapolis. I want Annapolis to be the city where outsiders come and look at us and you see what they're doing in Annapolis. Well, let's bring the same thing that they're doing in Annapolis to our cities. And I believe that we have the power to do that, but we all have to believe, we all have to work together in order for this actual change to come. We can't keep having concealed racism in our city. We can't be the sailboat capital of the nation, and all of our residents don't have access to adequate waterfronts or no waterfronts at all. We can't talk about Stanton Center and how imperative it was to the Black community as far as education and recreational programs, but Stanton Center is getting underfunded for so many years. We can't continue to act like everything is okay when everything is really lopsided, when nothing has ever been okay in this city. We have to take real action. We can't get off of this Zoom call and go sleep and act as though the city is normal when the city is all over the place. This is the best time to do it. If not now, then never. And I'm not taking never for an answer. That will never be an option for me, because I will always fight for my people and I will always fight for what's right. So I think now is the time that we all step up. If it's our elected officials, if it's the residents, even if it's outside, it's time that we step up and bring actual change to our city so we can see a beautiful future that we want the younger generation, even younger than me, to grow up in, so they don't have to face any unjust situations and they can live a happy life without stressing, without thinking that they are so far behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And just so you'll know, for everyone, I am taking copious notes, as is Will, and you will each receive a copy of the notes from tonight's town hall. The notes and all of the information from all three town halls will be compiled and presented to the City Council with an objective, I hope, and working with all of my colleagues, we're going to create our own action plan. And so all of the suggestions that you're offering will go into this action plan. And we'll be able to determine what's doable, what's, short-term, long-term, et cetera. And so, there is a purpose to this. And I hear you, Mr. Lloyd. We hear everyone who's speaking to us. And now is the time to put this information down and to codify a plan for our city. And so with that, I'm not the only alderman on this town hall tonight. So I'm going to go next to Alderman Fred Paone, who does represent Ward 2, which, Mr. Lloyd, he is your alderman. Fred Paone represents the Clay Street community and West Annapolis community. So, Alderman, you've spent your career on the side of the law in the prosecutor's office. So you probably have a very different perspective, especially as it relates to crime and, locking people up, for lack of a better description. So what do you think? Where do you think we as city leaders should be taking our city from here?
Well, thank you, Alderwoman Finlayson. I take issue with a number of things, perhaps not surprisingly, that Mo Lloyd just talked about, although I do agree with a number of things also. I think, as a prosecutor, I was looking at things by and large from a very different perspective than we're talking about here tonight. I was chief of the Violent Crimes Unit for almost 20 years, and I saw some things that very few people see. It was very discouraging at times, I don't mind telling you, but I think the problems we have right now are really, there are two stages. We have the immediate problems, and then we have the long-term problems. The immediate issues are crime in public housing, violent crime, particularly in public housing. If we don't take care of that first, the long-term plans, everything, most everything that Mr. Lloyd talked about, they're not going to come into fruition. And the reason for that is nobody's going to be doing the things that are needed to be done unless they are safe. And that is Black folks and white folks both. It doesn't go along racial lines. We have a police department that needs to, I think, get much more into community policing. I'm tremendously disappointed that they haven't done more of that at this point. They need to redeploy. They need to, they need to do a lot of things. And I'm hopeful that our chief is going to move in that direction quickly. I wish some of these things had already been done. Once we get past and how we get past the initial or the immediate problem, well, you could probably talk to a dozen experts and get a dozen different answers. But one of the things that I've noted is that in almost all of these homicides, the community has allowed the threats against them, and in many cases they're very real threats, don't misunderstand, to get in the way of the criminal justice system. Alderwoman Finlayson, you and I, and some others, particularly those on the Public Safety Committee, we understand that there are very few of these homicides, recent homicides, that have been committed in a vacuum. We know that they're revenge killings, and we know that there are a number of witnesses for most of these things that could testify or at least come forward and tell us, what happened, how it happened, who did it. And when the community rises in its, righteous might and decides that the risk involved of coming forward is worth it, that it is, you weigh that versus the amount of good it will do in the community, when the community realizes that coming forward outweighs the risk, the problem will be over. Criminals don't go around committing crimes when they think they're going to be caught. And make no mistake, I completely understand, and to a large extent, I sympathize why people don't come forward. They think they're going to be killed, and maybe they are. I don't know, but I've seen this happen in other communities. Actually, in several different communities here in the city. It used to be that the center of crime would move from Robinwood. Finally, people in Robinwood would get fed up. They'd come forward, and it didn't end the problem, but it ended the problem in Robinwood. They'd move to Eastport Terrace. Same thing all over again. Then it would go to Annapolis Gardens, and et cetera, et cetera. But the immediate problem has to be taken care of, immediately. I don't know, the police can come out and investigate till they're blue in the face, and people aren't willing to come forward. This is going to continue because the bad guys, the bullies, the dangerous people that don't belong out in the streets are going to continue because they know that nobody's going to blow the whistle on them. Now, occasionally the police, not occasionally, but frequently the police have gotten lucky, gotten a break. So we've been able to solve some of these, but not nearly all of them. Long-term, what needs to be done? Now we're talking about the defund the police movement. Now, in my opinion, defunding the police in any way, shape, or form is a huge mistake. But redirecting some of that money for other purposes, social workers. I know that we passed an ordinance that you sponsored Alderwoman Finlayson, where we're going to hire a social worker to help out with this issue, but we're going to need more than one, and we're going to need follow-up programs, jobs programs. People need to become trained to function not in a violent society, but in everyday, hopefully everyday society, where they can go out, get a job, come home, spend their money on something other than guns and drugs, and make a positive contribution to society. That's not always easy. It's certainly not free, the training part, that is. We need jobs. We need jobs, and we need training for those jobs. Again, when that happens, I think you're going to see the crime rate go down. We need to keep people in school. That I do know about from my experience, because the chances of somebody who has dropped out of high school, if they got that far, their chances of getting into trouble and being a bane of society's existence are far greater than anyone who has gone through 12th grade, even if they didn't do very well. They stayed in school, stayed with it, had a goal. Okay, they graduated with a C average or maybe even less, but they graduated. Do you know how many jobs people without a high school diploma are ineligible for? I mean, what are they going to get hired for the most part? Digging a ditch? What kind of work is that as a career? I don't mean to knock ditch diggers, but that's, I think we all would agree that's really not where most of us growing up saw ourselves ending up in life. That high school diploma allows you to do so many more things. But community policing, cooperation from the community in the short term, and putting some real money into these different areas to help develop programs that may exist now but need to be worked on, or may not exist. That's where the problem gets solved, in my opinion. And that's where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. You bring a different perspective from more of the criminal justice perspective than the rest of us. So thank you. And, some of the things that you mentioned, as you know, we are working on, like the social worker. But there are a lot of wraparound programs that need to be in place in order to address why some of our young people turn to, what they turn to. So thank you, and we'll come back to you. Pastor Patricia Johnson, an educator in Baltimore City at Mergenthal, as well as a religious leader. You have seen the injustices, and you have been part of the movement. I heard you over the weekend mention during your time at Morgan with Kwaisi during the protests. So you've been living this for most of your life also. So tell us where you think we should go from here.
Well, first of all, thank you, Alderwoman, for this opportunity. And I want to thank all of the previous esteemed panelists that you have had on prior to this third session. I was very impressed with Will giving us an opportunity to look at Annapolis as Annapolis has changed. Very impressed with Brother Lloyd as he looks at it from a young person's perspective. And so for me, I'm going to talk about let's get in some good trouble. The tentacles to all of this that we've heard so far tonight run very, very deep. this community of Annapolis has had two sides for a long time. That Brother Lord is just getting to see. Those of you who have been around for a long time, or even if you had a chance to go to Morgan or Bowie or UMES, we've seen it for most of our lives. But so tonight I want to just talk about where do we go from here? Because you cannot get in good trouble alone. You need some teams. And you've had some very esteemed persons on, like I said, on the panels. There's some really good programs that act singly. There's some really good people who are out there in the community. But just as a successful coach has a vision for putting a team together, you got to have the game plan for success. One person cannot do it singly. One person does not have enough power to gather change, to make change. And if you want to all be effective leaders, then we have to employ some different tactics to advance the plan for the vision of leadership for Annapolis. It is a shame. It is shameful to know. I pastored in Eastport, which was an all African-American community. To hear Brother Lord say, we sell property for a little bit of money. He didn't even say how much, but once you sell the property, then gentrification happens. And this is what has happened in Annapolis. Gentrification has happened, and we can't go back. And then we are pushed out of that particular community. And so tonight, I just want to talk about the challenge and change, because there's got to be both a challenge and a challenge for change. And tonight, you also need to hear that change complicates our normal way of doing things. It could be that we could reassess the police department, but one voice can't reassess the police department. It could be that we're so used to doing things the same way we do it. And yes, it may look like the crime moves from one housing project to another, and the next crime. The last meeting that I think I attended publicly when we could all sit together, I alluded to the fact that people in our community know physically who has the guns. You know who is doing the crime. You know who's selling the drugs. And how could this community, and let me just say this, since everybody in Annapolis think you got a legal drug dealer up on West Street, everybody in Annapolis must be sick, because I smell weed, reefer, marijuana everywhere. And that is part of your driven problem, but nobody monitors the place up on West Street that the people go and get their medical marijuana cards. The signs are all over Annapolis, the medical marijuana. Oh, I know. Listen, if you want to hear the truth, I'll tell it to you. Medical marijuana cards for $99. And then I go to West Street where you can't get a parking place on the lot now. And I bring that medical marijuana back into my community. And now I become the drug dealer that I'm not going to go to jail because it's marijuana. Let's get past all of that, because we're not going to get locked up for that. We're going to get locked up for our guns. We're going to get locked up for the violence that prevails as a result of having a gun. You're going to get locked up, whoever you are, who killed a 14-year-old young man. You are going to get caught, because karma will catch you. And so I want to talk more about how change complicates our normal way of doing things. We can't be comfortable anymore. You can't have 3 Zoom meetings or 3 town meetings or a meeting here and a meeting there, and you can't do it by yourself. Get to a place where we can break free of being comfortable. If Carl Snowden has a program, then 10 of you go with Carl Snowden's program. If Dr. McConnell has a program, then 10 people say, okay, I want to find out how I can make his program have tentacles. If our Will has some knowledge that he wants to impart, Will can't go to all the communities. And let's make the tentacles run deep. It's good to have these things, but change calls for the alteration and modification of our leadership mindset, our behavior, and our systems. You can't make change if you literally consider the fact that we'll just lock them up. Jennifer Road is piled up with people. That's not change. They're going to come right back out and do the same thing. You have to have tentacles that reach deep into rehabilitation, to reach deep into how do we get that person off of drugs? I have personally buried 4 persons this year who have died from fentanyl overdoses. Why is that in a place as small as Annapolis? Why is that? I'm just asking a rhetorical question. I know I'm not going to get an answer. But tonight, I challenge you to conform or transform. You can stay the same, or we can transform. We can get some tentacles, and even you can help with the prosecutor's office. I always say when I preach, stop being scared. SCURRED. Stop listening and Carmelo Anthony was one of the great basketball player, was one of the persons who started this snitches get stitches. And that's what Alderman Payon was saying, that people are afraid to come forth. But if you want to save your community as a group, if you come together as a group, tentacles, there are 10 people, not block watch one person, 10 people. We all in this together, and we're going to tell, if you come in our community, we are going to tell on you and have some signs up. There are no signs down here. Where I live in Woodstock, Maryland, everywhere there's a block watch. Everywhere there's a sign, private community. Get some signs up and let them know they're being watched. And they can't shoot out all the signs. They can't shoot out all the spotlights. So tonight I ask you in a scriptural way, don't be conformed to the things of this world. We've been conformed too long, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Your mindset has to change. And there's preparation for change, because you got people on this line tonight that want change. You have people on this line tonight that desire change. And guess what? The more things stay like they are, we're going to be having more Zoom meetings deciding how to do it. Now, I promise you that the churches do not do enough. I promise you that the churches do not do enough. But all ministry does not take place behind a sanctuary wall. Some of it takes place on Clay Street.
Yep.
Some of it takes place at the Stanton Center. Stop thinking you can't mix government and religion together, because if we do think that way, we're going down in a heap of flames, because the young people see us in ministry, and they see us in government, and they have no respect for us. I got a text the other day, Alderwoman Finlayson, that said, can you tell me why young people don't want to vote? I'm going to let that resonate. Mm-hmm. Why is it that young people do not want to vote? After all the marching that Brother Harold has done, after all the Black Lives Matter, let's get these folk registered. Not just get them registered. How about going and pick them up and taking them to the poll? Don't just leave them to their own discretion. That's change. That is change. And if we give them something to look forward to, like an education, I taught school for 40 years. Annapolis has no vocational education at Annapolis High School. There should be plumbing there. There should be architectural design there. There should be carpentry there. There should be at Annapolis High School, the only high school where everybody in Annapolis, I've never seen anything like it in my life, the only high school where everybody in Annapolis winds up going to. But the jobs, when they graduate and they have their degree, their diplomas, where are they going to go with academic diploma? So you need to get a committee, some tentacles of 10 or 15 people, and Bug, you had the school president on, and Bug for some space to house some programs. All I want to say is change, and we need some coaches. And I think on this line, and I think on the three before, that you have the head coach and some folk want to get on the teams so that we can make this thing work. Change. I'm done.
Thank you, Pastor. You have touched on so many things, but challenge and change first and foremost. I've had this discussion with the superintendent during the last call, because we are graduating young people out of high school with nothing to do, and they can't go to college because they haven't been prepared to do that. They haven't gotten into the vocational school because, that's at South River and it's at capacity. And so they graduate them with nothing to do. So my question is, my challenge to the superintendent is every kid that graduates should have a viable option for a career of some sort. We need woodworkers and painters and carpenters and plumbers, and those folks make good money. So it's not like we're sending them into jobs where they can't support their families, because they can, but they're not given the opportunity. And, I've had this discussion with Dr. McConnell in the past about going to sit down to talk to the principal and the superintendent. So you've touched on, so many of the things that we need to be working hard on and dividing our efforts so it's not one or two people. I have included aldermen on all of these town halls for a reason, because I know that I can't do it. But together, if all of us are part of the different discussions, then we're probably more willing to move forward on some things. So I hear you. I hear you. Dr. McConnell, do you remember our discussions of the past?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Talking about schools and how kids are graduating without anything to do. Definitely. No wonder they get into trouble when they get out of high school.
Most definitely.
So where do we go from here, Dr. McConnell?
So again, I really want to thank everyone for your comments, but Brother Lloyd, I really want you to know that we all hear your passion, and we are all here to help you and the entire community grow. So I really want you to know there's a lot of people willing to support you, me personally, and everyone on this call and the previous calls. So do not think you're in the fight alone. And you can always reach out to me personally and everybody else. But I want you to know, I think all of us were touched by your comments, because it's very gratifying. Yes. So just a quick backdrop. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I was really fortunate because I had a dog when I was a kid, and the neighborhood that I lived in was a rough neighborhood, but no one ever messed with me because I had a German Shepherd, and I have a German Shepherd to this day. But having that dog provided security for me, because everybody knew, don't mess with Irving, because he's the guy that has that black German Shepherd. So because I had a German Shepherd, I ended up liking animals, and I started thinking, man, what can I do for a living working with animals and make money? and I heard about this profession being a veterinarian. And I looked all around for a veterinarian that looked like me. And there was no veterinarian around my area that looked like me. So I found another vet, and I just, went to his place and had my dog's nails clipped, every 2 weeks. And they never needed clipping that much, but I wanted to just go in this vet clinic. And then fast forward, after high school, I wanted to become a veterinarian. And then I found out I had to go to Tuskegee because that was the only school I could go to be a veterinarian. But when I landed there, this woman was in registration. Her name was Mrs. Young. And I didn't know anything about her son, Sammy Young. But Sammy Young was killed in Tuskegee, Alabama, for drinking water out of a water fountain just a couple of years before I went there because it said, whites only. So for me going down south, I learned a lot about life, racism, and survival. I met Colonel Carter, that was a Tuskegee Airman, and other Tuskegee Airmen that lived in Tuskegee, and learned that history. I learned about the syphilis study. And so when you talk about bioethics and racism, I've sort of been through this, my whole life. So when I transgressed and became a veterinarian, went through the military, went through racism in the military, and then came out. And then when I moved to Annapolis, I started meeting all the kids in the area because I'm a big, kid fan. I love kids and I want to help the younger generation. So I'm always asking, where'd you go to high school? Everybody went to Annapolis High. So what are you going to do? Nobody knew what they were going to do. And just from all these kids that I met, and I go in, Fresh Market and everywhere, and I see these kids, nobody has any goals. And it was sort of like the high school that I went to, and I'm thinking, man, what's going on? How come these kids don't have goals? So one of the things that Pastor Johnson talked about, and it's really, really key for me to see this, because now from looking at Annapolis, and you look at the Annapolis area, and you can actually see things around here that people could do well in. So if you look at the critical areas that we have, and we have the Environmental Protection Agency all around us looking at water issues. We have NOAA looking around the areas. This is a great boating environment. And, can anyone show me, a couple guys on Clay Street that are working on boat engines and are boat mechanics? And we're here in Annapolis, and we don't have these kids involved in the marine industry. I was on Governor O'Malley's Workforce Investment Board, and we started a program while I was on the board on the GWeb looking at creating opportunities for people that wanted to get in the marine industry. But I never really saw a lot of minorities getting involved or getting that word that these opportunities were there. The same thing with the construction industry. So I think one of the things that, as we look at the vocations, I think we need to look at the businesses that are in the immediate area and go to them and look at them to develop programs and internships and mentorships for all these kids around us, so they see opportunities and they get the chance to learn at the same time, and building their confidence, because just by interacting with people, you need to build your confidence. And I always tell people your net worth depends on your net worth depends on your network. And a lot of these kids have to learn how to network and get involved. And again, for our brother Lloyd, just to be able to get on this call and to be professional from the standpoint that I'm listening to him, there are a lot of kids that just can't do that. So we need to get more experience so more kids have exposure. So again, I grew up in an agriculture background from college. And when you look at what's around Annapolis, you may not think there's a lot here, but there is a lot here because of the Bay. And there are opportunities for our kids to learn about that. And the USDA has programs for kids, but I guarantee you the kids in Annapolis don't know anything about those programs. So I think, trying to develop like a team professional development program would be key. But going back to what Pastor Johnson was saying, because at some point we need to come out and look at, what are we going to do after this Zoom call? But we keep talking about the vocational piece, which I think is real interesting. So I go to Tuskegee, Alabama, all the time, and I'm working with trying to build an aviation program within the university and the town because of the brand of the Tuskegee Airmen. And I know nothing about aviation, but I'm a business guy. So I'm trying to help the community grow because we need we need jobs in Tuskegee, Alabama. So aviation is another area that's hot. So when you look at Baltimore, Jerome Hodge has the largest minority aviation repair facility in the area. Yeah. And imagine having some kids, work through Jerome's program to learn about aviation. Some of those kids are going to want to fly, but we got to expose these kids to all these different things. So for me, I'm a veterinarian. I'm really big in trying to get minorities into veterinary medicine so I can see more people that look like me. So we have animals all around Annapolis, and we have the ASPCA, and they have all these animals there. And it's so simple to develop a training program to teach kids how to train dogs. So, you take 10 kids, every, 3 months, teach them how to train dogs. They go to this program. We get them there. We give them, snacks or dinner or whatever, and they're training dogs. And then people come to Annapolis to get these, they get a dog. The dog is already trained. So you're building a lot of skills when you take a young person and you teach them how to train a dog. And then at some point, they even learn a little bit more, and they may want to be a vet tech. There's a vet tech program at the Anne Arundel Community College. So how do we get more kids involved in that and help sponsor kids to be part of that? We have a group of veterinarians in Annapolis. You don't have veterinarians in Annapolis that look like me. But how do we get these kids to understand there's an opportunity? Because if kids don't see people that look like them, it's really difficult. It's hard for people to understand that. It's hard to want to do something if you don't see people that look like you that do that. So I think, if we look at some of these areas and pick a couple of them and focus on it, because like Pastor Johnson said, there's so much stuff that needs to be done. There's so much stuff, and we can't do it all, but we need to grab one program or two programs. For me, I don't see a lot of kids going to college. So, I was going to the military place to get a haircut because it cost me $9 to get a haircut. But I said, you know what? I need to go local and get a haircut locally and interact with the kids that are in there. And then I asked the barbers, I said, well, how many of these kids go to college? Well, not too many. And I asked a couple of kids, I said, name 2 colleges in Maryland. They couldn't name 2 colleges in Maryland. So I started taking material from colleges. I got, fortunately, I know the president at Morgan and people in admissions, Tuskegee and all these other. I would just grab all this material and just flood the shop with stuff from colleges so these kids will start seeing it. Because if you think about branding, years ago, and some of you will know this, when you saw this guy sitting on a horse, smoking a cigarette, people thought that was cool, but that was branding. And some of you, may not know, I used to work in the pharmaceutical world, but when you watch these shows on television about taking these drugs, they're like branding you to want to take these drugs. So if you take information about colleges and it's in all the barbershops and the women beauty salons, when these young women go and these young males go in these places and they keep seeing that, it's going to mentally affect them. And they're like, wow, I got to go to college. But we need more people. I I can't do this alone. And I've tried to ask other people, rally behind me. And all we got to do is call the colleges up and get this information and just flood it into these schools and get, I had, the flags, with, I'm a little partial with Tuskegee because, I went there. So I'm going to have more Tuskegee stuff, but I make sure I have Maryland, Eastern Shore, and Morgan and Bowie in there also, because those are the local schools. But I think, so there's two pieces, that the educational piece, but the vocational piece I think is really going to be critical. And my last point that I wanted to make, just from a business sense. So, nobody talks about, and if you look at, I have the history and I know the people that helped me when I was in Tuskegee, Alabama. These were business people that owned everything in the town. And they and this is why I go there all the time, because they helped me, they fed me. They gave me job opportunities. So if we can take something now and let these high school kids know about what it takes to be a entrepreneur, because somebody is going to do that, and that's how you build wealth. So when you look at Annapolis and you look at landscapers, and you don't see a lot of professional-owned landscaping companies where people are coming from Clay Street. So how do we teach 2 or 3 or 4 guys, to actually work together as a team, go through the SBA, because the Small Business Administration has a program to teach you how to run a business, how to do payroll, and they will do that for free. And they have small business development centers that will set them up. But if we guide them and let them know, so what do you want to do? I want to have a landscaping company because I've worked for this company for 4 years and now I think I know how to do it. Okay, now we're going to put you in this little business program to show you how to run a business. But we need to make sure people know about these opportunities so when they go out there, they can run a business. And there are programs out there for free, but I'm willing to bet you, if we go to Annapolis High, these kids know nothing about that. Know nothing about it. So how do we teach these kids about entrepreneurship? Because it's not college is not for everybody. It just isn't. I took a route going through the military, and the military paid for everything for me. So when I walked out of college, I did not owe a dime, and I would do it again. But everybody just doesn't want to go through the military program. But that's another way. So we have the Naval Academy here. So what is Annapolis? What's the program within Annapolis where we ensure X number of slots at the Naval Academy are for now kid? Do we have that program? Are we interacting with the Naval Academy to make sure X number of our kids get in there? So. No. These are just some of my comments and some of my feelings, and I'm willing to do what it takes to get anything done, and willing to support anybody's effort, because collectively, again, Pastor Johnson hit it. Everybody's sort of working all these little small things, and we're having 4 or 5 Zoom calls, but we need to focus on a couple of things, and part of that may be to get funding for that vocational program and to make sure we get it, because there's funding out there, but we need to make sure we go through that process and get that funding. But while we're getting that funding, we can pick one particular area just to show that it works. If it's carpentry, or if it's marine or aviation or landscaping or whatever. Okay, so I'll close there. But I just wanted to get those. I think I got most of my points out that I wanted to get out. Okay.
Well, thank you, Dr. McConnell. And of course, I knew that you would touch on the education piece and the significance of giving young people an opportunity to learn a skill of some sort. And like you said, everybody doesn't have to go to college, but everybody can do something. And if we touch them in the right way, we can steer them to where they need to be. So absolutely, thank you. Our last speaker this evening is Mr. Harrington, who grew up in Annapolis, worked in Baltimore City, and eventually left us for a warmer climate. Mr. Harrington, I suspect Florida is somewhat different from the state of Maryland. Some of the problems are probably the same, but maybe some of the solutions are different there. So what advice would you give us on where we should go from here? You're on mute, Mr. Harrington.
Thank you so much, Alderwoman Pearson, Dr. McConnell, Dr. Johnson, Brother Lloyd, Alderman Payon. I've learned a lot tonight, and one of the most important things I learned is that there's a lot of intelligence and smart people here in Annapolis. And I would say that Annapolis doesn't have any problem that it can't solve itself. That's my overall observation from everything I've heard. And there's so many natural resources here and human resources here. There's absolutely, in my view, no reason we can't solve these problems. The problems we are having are the problems of leadership and the problems of organization. Who said, where there is no vision, the people shall perish? There is our issue there. If there is vision, it's not being articulated and it's not being led. Leadership is getting others to do the work of the organization. What Annapolis needs, and let me just back up to say, I went to Bowie State, but before I went to Bowie, I went to Annapolis High School. And for some reason, I took the difficult courses, and I didn't do great at all A's in those difficult courses, Brother Lloyd. I took the courses that were hard because I wanted to see what I could do. And I barely made it out of some of those courses. But what advanced chemistry did for me, what advanced physics did for me, what algebra did for me, what those difficult courses did for me was it showed me that I could achieve those things. And I could do as well as those white kids in my class whose parents were the teachers at the Naval Academy and Aeronautical Radio. And I realized that they didn't have anything that I didn't have. And if what they had that I didn't have is a lot of money, because then they put their education to work in careers because they had a vision of what they wanted their careers to be. It was different in Florida for some reasons, Sheila, but it was very much to say. At the end of my career in Florida, I was the PR director, the chief of communications for the Palm Beach County School District. It's the 10th largest school district in America. And I would stand on the stage with its principals, and I served 6 superintendents there. And before that, it was the Baltimore City school system, where I did some of the same things. But I stood on the stage. I could go to any high school graduation I wanted. So I went to several. I went to a lot of them. I went to the schools that were 99% of the kids going to college. I went to the schools where hardly anybody was going to college after they graduated. And I saw these kids that come across the stage, and I would help giving them their diplomas and shaking their hand. And I saw some of them were elated. Some of them were excited. And some of them were shaking and had the fear in their faces. And the fear was because they didn't have anything to do come Monday morning after graduation. We had not prepared them for careers or college. We like to say in public education, as you know, we're preparing a student for the college and career ready. When I knew, and many of us knew, there were too many were neither college nor career ready. When I retired in 2013, I sat down and God gave me this mission to do. I wrote this book. It's called How to Launch Your Career in 7 Steps. Live, work, and succeed with purpose. But Dr. McConnell, we're singing the same song. What happens is America is such a hyper-capitalist society. There's so many career paths that people can take. Young people are just thoroughly confused and are not even exposed to but a minuscule number of things that they could do. What the book talks about is getting back to the basics. What is your purpose in life? What is your aptitude? What are your dreams and your goals? And then it's easy from that point forward. Then you just draw lines to get to where you want to be. First, you have to know, Mr. Lloyd, what you're good at, what God gave you that's unique to you, that nobody else has. So when you perfect that, you will get hired because you're the only one who is as good at that as you are. You're unique in that. So the book is about how to start with understanding and identifying your purpose in life. It gets kind of spiritual, but it's really kind of a basic thing because we all have a sense of what we really want to do. We all have a dream. So the book talks about getting back in touch with that dream you had. Whether maybe you were a kid, maybe you're having a dream now. You didn't pursue it for whatever reason. You were afraid. You didn't think you were good enough. You didn't think you were smart enough. You didn't think you had enough money. You didn't think whatever. All the negative things we've been conditioned to think about ourselves so we don't pursue our dreams. If we pursue our dream, what we want to do, as outlandish as it may seem to somebody, we will exceed at that because that is what we're wired to do. And you marry your purpose in life to your aptitude. So I'll take all the students I talk to after the book and before the book, and I say, go online to get a free online aptitude test and take that test. It's about 100 questions. There's so many of them. It'll tell you in about 15 minutes. The algorithms are getting better and better at this. They'll tell you about 15 minutes after you answer a battery of questions what you are uniquely wired to do. And it will give you a list of 10 or 15 careers that you're uniquely talented and wired to do. So you look at that list and you'll see some things that jump out at you. Wow, I wanted to do that. The things that jump out at you, that's what your subconscious is telling you that you're wired to do. Go and do that. Okay, what do you need to do to do that? Don't go to college just for college's sake. Go to college because you have a specific goal in mind for what that college degree is going to make you able to do. That's what college is for, or it may be a career school. It may be whatever. Nobody can do what you can do but you that well. Let me fast forward to say that the book is on, not selling the book, but it's just a process of organizing thoughts, organizing what your aspiration and your goals are so that nobody can tell you what you should do. You already know, in my view, what you want to do. And you have, as Dr. McConnell pointed out, there are lots of ways to go about funding it. Even if you have to get loans to do it, you'll pay off the loans. Don't let that get in the way of something you really want to do. There's no other way. Don't let money get in the way of what you want to do, because when you're working on what you want to do, money becomes kind of secondary. You'll make a lot of money what you want to do because you're going to be better at it than many other people, most other people. But money will come. But then you realize that money's not the most important thing. It's not really what motivates us. What motivates us is doing what we love to do. So get in touch with what you love to do, and you'll succeed at it. Let me back up and say that the three things that I think we need to be doing here tonight. We need a strategic planning process and a strategic plan for this city. I'm kind of appalled that I'm not hearing a city like Annapolis, a world-class city with leadership that has the plan for creating a strategic plan. What you do with the strategic plan is you get everybody, all the sectors of the population in a room over a process, and they take a year. And you get everybody's mission, you get a vision for the town. Who do we want to be? You get a mission. How do we want to do that? You get strategies and objectives for doing that. And then you go about, and the rest is easy. But if you don't have a vision for what you want Annapolis to be, we'll have everybody speaking all over each other. There's a cacophony of voices, and no one's following because everybody wants to lead, and no one's leading because they want to do what they want to do. Well, going about creating a strategic plan, put all of that in a process where everybody can contribute, and you come out of that room, guess what? With a unified vision, a mission, a set of values that we all can embrace. I'm very hopeful, based on all the white people in the streets with the black people finally getting to realize that as Black Americans go in this country, so go everyone else. This is everybody's fight to solve racial injustice. So when we get people in the room to solve this Annapolis problem, which is lack of vision, lack of leadership, and lack of a strategic plan, and then we have all the bright people we have heard from tonight and many others giving their views, you know, the smartest person in the room cannot be smarter than everybody else in the room. The group is always going to be smarter. So you always want to get to a mastermind alliance, the mastermind, which is getting a strategic planning process and having that facilitated by someone outside of Annapolis. Can't have anybody who wants to drive it as their personal agenda. Failing to do a strategic plan, you know what we'll have? We'll have what you have now. We're careening from crisis to crisis, from event to event, whims upon whims. You'll have confusion and chaos because we don't have a clear vision as to where we want to go. When you have a vision of where you want to go, the rest is easy. You go there. The strategies are the easiest part of it. And all the bright minds in Annapolis will know exactly how. When you ask the brain how to do something, it's a lot easier than asking what to do. So the plan is to get to what we want to do, who we are, and then you ask how we get there, and put those pieces in place. Then you come back and revisit the strategic plan on an every year basis. So you have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan, and a 50-year plan for Annapolis. Here's what's going to look like. It's going to look like there should be housing integration all over Annapolis, just like Columbia and many of the planned cities in the country used to be. The Routes Company, when it built Columbia, built this specifically to have low-income housing and high-income housing in the same communities. So we can all get our garbage picked up the same way at the same time. And so we always are benefiting from the same services. That's what the planned city concept is about. We need that in Annapolis. We have where we can bring back, I think we are way down the road from where I saw Annapolis when I left, but we can bring these communities back to Annapolis and have everyone participate and live in Annapolis proper, not out in the various places in public housing. In Annapolis, you can have Eastport having places where there are pocket parks so people can go to the water like Mr. Lloyd talked about. You can have communities in Eastport that are affordable housing that look like every other house. That's what it's all about. So a strategic planning process is desperately needed for Annapolis. It needs to be led by someone who can call everybody together and create a community vision. The second thing that we need to do is financial literacy, investing in wealth building. And money doesn't care what color you are. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I'm an average person. But if you have a process for creating wealth, building wealth, it's beyond being rich. Wealth is creating riches and money so that it perpetuates itself. That's what I'm doing now. I bet you Dr. McConnell's doing that now. He probably doesn't have to work anymore. So he's invested in things that are paying him now and will pay him for the rest of his life. Frederick Douglass, who is right here in Highland Beach, his third son, Charles, created Highland Beach in 1892. Frederick Douglass has a summer home here. It's Twin Oaks. We're not doses for that. Twin Oaks Museum. Frederick Douglass, who was born a slave, taught himself reading and writing, and he also taught himself investing. You know that Frederick Douglass, when he died, left his heirs $5 million. And he said, money is not exactly the root of evil. He said, the curse of our people, of our race, is poverty. So we need to focus on how to get ourselves out of poverty. No one's going to give us any money. We need to get our own money, and we already have it. People like Robert Smith, billionaire, Bob Johnson, billionaire. We've already shown that we can create wealth. We can create money. And we can help each other with that. It's not a big deal to create wealth in America. I've done it. It's not a big deal. It's not that easy, but it's not that hard. But it needs a process. Every school system in America practically now has a financial literacy curriculum, but it's not taught. Why is that? Some kids have it. And some kids even are participating in stock market clubs in high school. And guess what? They're killing it. They're making lots of money, fake money, of course. But when those kids get out of high school, they're going to go into business, as Dr. McConnell said. They're going to be entrepreneurs. They're going to make tons of money. And then they're going to realize that money's not the most important thing to me. Money doesn't create happiness. Doing what you love to do creates happiness. Money is a really important tool to help others solve problems and to help the world become a better place. So diseases, pandemics, and all the rest, but it's not valuable for in and of itself. So the love of money can be redirected to help others, and it will not be the evil that many people believe it's been. The third thing I want to talk about is breaking the cycle of poverty. We need to do this ourselves. There's something called restorative justice, and this involves creating healing circles where people who are the perpetrators of crimes and the victims of crimes are brought together. The Native Americans did this, and other ancient societies did this. And they sentenced themselves. Their own perpetrators and their own victims got to participate in their families. So you sit people down who are the victims of gunshots and the perpetrators of the shootings, and you get them in a room. This is happening right now with a group I'm working with called CAVI, Kings Against Violence Initiative in Central Brooklyn. It started by a doctor out of Morehouse, Dr. Rob Gore, who's an ER doctor in Kings County Hospital. He was tired of taking bullets out of boys. Then the next week, he did take bullets out of boys who shot the other guy. So you're seeing a cycle of violence, victims going back, becoming the perpetrators. And he started a program called CAVI. He had lots of New York money to do it. We can do the same thing here in Annapolis and Baltimore and all over the country if we have the will to do it and the vision to do it. So the hospital part of that program gets people before they even go back home out of the hospital after they survive, if they survive the gunshot, how they're going to put them in on their feet and get them to avoid going back in the same situation. There's a community-based aspect of that, and there's a school-based aspect of that. But at the end of that are these healing circles where we are solving our problems ourselves. We're getting the victims' families and the perpetrators' families together in a room, sitting down, being facilitated by professionals. And once they see the victims' families and the perpetrators' families and see they're human beings who want the same things, what happens is the violence stops. The cycle is broken. So Alderman Payon, I hear you struggling for how do we solve this. Crime is simply a symptom of the problem. The problem is systemic racism, systemic poverty. And when people get in those situations, they're going to do what you see doing now. We've got to solve the problem at the root cause, which is giving people control of their destiny through careers. And how do we do that? Having leadership in Annapolis that brings economic prosperity to Annapolis by planning industries here so the young people will have things to do, whether it's college-based jobs or career-based jobs. So it's, again, strategic planning, have vision, and then have a multi-year plan to get Annapolis to what you want it to be. 20 years from now, 50 years from now, even next year. Financial literacy, investing in wealth building for everyone. We should be teaching our children how to handle their money. If they don't handle their money, you know what's going to happen? Someone's going to handle their money for them. And they'll be making more money off of your money than you're making. And that's happening. We've got to teach people to get in control of their own destiny, get in control of their own wealth, the careers that they're working, the jobs they're working. We all read the stories about the janitor who worked 30, 40 years. Lo and behold, he passes away. He had $1 million. It's not that difficult in America. America is the most powerful economic engine on the planet. We all should be participating in it. It's not that difficult. Read it, study it. It's like reading and to become a carpenter or a mechanic or anything else if you're interested in doing it. All the ones we talked about, Curtis Wall Street Carroll, guy who didn't know how to read and write. He's in prison right now doing petty crimes. Guy saw him in prison, said, well, you seem to be pretty. What are you doing? I did a robbery, when he got shot, didn't get killed, but I got 40 years. 40 years? Man, guys strong like you should be doing better than this. He said, you should learn about the stock market. What's the stock market? That's where white people keep their money. What? Really? And he taught himself how to read and write, and he taught himself the stock market. Curtis Wall Street Carroll today is still serving his sentence, but he is investing in stocks and bonds and mutual funds and ETFs and all the other asset classes. He's a multi-millionaire right now. He's probably not even 30 years old. He taught himself how to read and write and how to use the stock market, how to use America's most powerful economic engine on the planet ever created by what? By the labor of Black people who did put America on the map, made it the greatest engine on the planet as far as its economic power. This is the engine we should be using. Why are we afraid of the stock market? It's not to be afraid, it's to be learned. Oh, the stock market crashes. You know what happens every time the stock market crashes? It comes back and it achieves new highs. Ever since 1929, the greatest crash, it came back in 4 years. In 29 years, it was 25 years beyond where it was, and it's never turned back. Every time the market goes down as it did 4 days ago by 10%, it came back up 3% yesterday and 3% today. No, it'll be back up. So I bought stock when it went down 10%. Keep some dry powder. So this is how it's done. You buy when it's low, sell when it's high. You take off your profit. You go buy yourself a new car or whatever you want to buy, and you keep your money in the market because here's the two things that are driving the market. The population was always increasing. Number two, companies will always find a way to make money. If they don't, they'll go out of business. It'll be replaced by another company that will make money because they're listening to what people's needs are. We can do all three of those solutions. I'm about solutions. I've heard all the problems. It makes me very, very sad in my heart. I'm sitting here almost in tears, hearing about my hometown, Annapolis, stuck and mired in these problems. And it seems like we're stuck in time. There are communities all over the planet, folks, that are doing much better than Annapolis because they've succumbed to training themselves in discipline. What I'm talking about is things that I got from time to time, the great training I got in my career. I mean, people who are running Fortune 500 companies like Mark Templeton, Citrix Systems, sent all of us, the superintendent's cabinet, away to University of Virginia. We learned how to do business, running the school system. Why? Because we're accountable to the taxpayers. We're accountable to these young people. So if you don't have a plan, you don't have a vision, the students will perish. We're perishing here in Annapolis, and we need to stop, get a grip, get a plan, be disciplined about it, and invest in ourselves right now so Mr. Lord can have a future he deserves. You're muted, Sheila. You're muted. Can't hear you.
Sorry, my phone rang a little while ago. I am speechless, however, because you've kind of hit the nail on the head. You've made it very clear what our problems are and how we address them. And I'm gonna, all of the participants this evening were chosen because I know that you can help us. Maybe this is selfish on my part, but I know that we can't do this alone. I know that there are greater minds out there than the 9 of us that sit around the dais in City Hall. And my colleague Fred was sending me a text saying he's being blown away by what he's hearing. So you've been invited this evening to participate, to share your ideas, and hopefully you'll be just as willing to help us when called upon to create that strategic plan that we need, to identify those weaknesses that we have, and to come up with the opportunities that we need to give the Mr. Lloyds, as you've said. So first of all, let me thank everyone. I'm not sure we have any questions coming in. I'll have to ask Julian that question. But do you all have questions for one another at this point?
Well, mine is not so much question. It's more so on the side of, just rebutting off of all of the information that everybody just said, because I think the message always gets misinterpreted, and there's a huge disconnect between the older generation and the younger generation, and it seems like we're all not working together. So I just want to touch on a few things. So first with you, Alderman Payon, I have to disagree, because when we think about crime and public housing, we also have to address the outside fact. When we talk about guns and drugs, those are not created in our public housing communities in Annapolis. Obviously, they come from somewhere else. And when a lot of these individuals get locked up for guns, we start to realize that they didn't even have a gun license. So how did they get the gun? See, that's the first thing that we have to talk about. Then we have to talk about how did the drugs get to Annapolis, because these drugs aren't made in Annapolis. And then we have to talk about the systemic racism that has been put into our society, because now I'm going on West Street and I see a weed shop, and I'm thinking in my mind, wow, now I only got to get a medical card. But just 15 years ago, my peers, our parents, uncles, brothers who lived in the community were catching felony charges for this. And now we are watching people profit off of this, as other people were disenfranchised and they were stripped of so many of their rights just for selling marijuana. And now that's like a slap in our face to see that people are actually making profit off this legally. And there are still people who are locked up for marijuana till this day. So that's one of the issues. Then on top of that, I witnessed that all of you talked about education, and that is great, because, we do have to change our traditional education system, because the education system is so corrupted, and it's not, our education system was never created for people of color, especially at the integration, because we witnessed that it pertained to white students more than it pertained to black students. But back when we had separation, our black schools pertained to black students. But we had to integrate because our black schools were so underfunded. This is what we're witnessing today with our HBCUs. Our black schools are still underfunded. So how are we going to change that? And I see that, Brother Nat, I see that you said that, we have to do it ourselves. Well, it's so hard to do it ourselves when we have to face 1,000 obstacles. And I see that you highlighted the stock market. Well, I'm really invested in the stock market, and I try to get a lot of my friends invest into the stock market. But it's so hard to invest in the stock market when your funds are so low, when you have to juggle between either am I going to pay this rent or are we going to have food in the house? See, these are the things that we don't put into perspective. See, it sounds easy when we say it, but when we are asking people who are struggling on a consistent basis to do these type of things, it's really hard for them, because it's am I going to choose this decision to help me out, or if I don't choose this decision, should I choose the safe decision so I don't even have to worry about losing money or losing my job or losing my house? Situations like that we don't think about, because once we advance a bit, we forget about the people who are behind us and how they function. And I think that's one of the reasons why I can still function so great and I can still help my people by going back and mentoring and having my nonprofit organization is because I still ask them questions. I still ask them their opinions, and I still look at the time when I was struggling down Robinwood and how my struggles were similar to their struggles, and how can I give them a new mindset so in the future, as you said, strategic planning, in the future, they can be in this position. But we all know the pandemic has showed us that nobody knows what the future is actually going to bring us. People cannot afford to put $5,000 in the stock market and the stock market crash and they lose the money. People think about stuff like that. So it's better to stay on the safe side. Yes, you should invest your money. I do tell people, if you can invest it, invest it. But if you can't invest it, you're always going to be in that particular area where you cannot go up higher. You cannot climb the ladder because there's so many obstacles that you have to face because of systemic racism. And back on the topic with defunding the police, as you said, after that, reallocating the money. But I don't see why there was any confusion, because the funding and abolishing are two different definitions. We defunded our school systems. We defunded the healthcare systems. It's easy to say it like that because we all understand that our school systems don't receive the same amount of money. But we always talking about police and how can they change and how can community policing work and how can these systems correlate with helping low-income areas where crime is very prevalent. Well, we keep on funding the police more and more and crime keeps going up. So we have to understand that funding the police is not really the solution. The only solution to poverty, the only antidote to poverty is opportunity, giving these people more resources, more chances to do something better, to better their life.
I also wanted to jump. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I wasn't even sure my mic was on, but I wanted to jump in on everything you're saying and more. And a large part of that is I wanted to do a more emotional, like esoteric, overarching statement about all the things that I heard, which is at all costs, no matter who of us is speaking, remember that the humanitarian approach is to have grace, And, I pose that because in actuality, when you really look at it, are we really doing that for the Black experience as it relates to institutionalized racism? And are we really doing that? Are we really truly honest about looking at the impact that our economic systems, our banking systems, housing, policy, Jim Crow, and the reason why I pose that, because I understand everybody, especially right now, are just sick and tired of Black people talking about how much their lives matter and just racism and what's going on. And it's threatening and challenging. But again, how do we have any of these conversations and jump to law enforcement right off the bat and talk about shootings and violence? Because I'm a Black man, just as Mo is, and just as our other panelists are. And the Black experience does not always have to do with incarceration, prosecution, jail, crime, guns, violence. That is not the Black experience. The Black experience is the exact same experience that every other human being has, which is we want to live and exist in thriving, safe environments. We want to have support systems. We want to have money in the bank. We want to own property. We want to be able to take care of our families, and we want to thrive. And we want to, ascend in our careers. And so I want to reframe this to talk about the issue of grace, and I'm almost done, but the grace thing is important because we all have to retrain how we're creating a narrative about the Black experience. So remember, African Americans, Black people are not monolithic. They do not all, share the exact same experiences, nor do they all wake up every day looking at the world through the eyes of someone who's a victim. Because even people right now, as we speak, who live in poverty, wake up every day believing that they will somehow survive and that they'll find a way. And Mo and myself and others, I wouldn't even be sitting here today if the truth of the matter is African Americans, particularly in the city of Annapolis and everywhere else, went through the Middle Passage. They went through slavery. They went through Jim Crow. They went through Reconstruction. They went through policies, lynchings, everything else, genocide, everything else to sit here today. So I do believe that the solution is right here. And I don't think it's fatalistic, but to Mo's point also, let's have grace. Let's really look at all of those barriers that are there. And, I think that truth is the only thing that allows us to really, truly develop a strategy and move forward. But we can't jump over those things because very few other people in this country, aside from Native Americans and tribal communities, have experienced, being on reservations and being locked out of systems. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Will. Pastor Pat, were you wanting to weigh in? I thought I saw you.
Yes, I would like to, Brother Nat, is your book on Amazon, or how can I get about 3 dozen of books to pass out?
The ebook is $4, maybe $5. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. It's on Booklock. Yes, I'm under my name and how to launch your career in 7 steps. Okay,
I think I'd rather have a hard copy because we go over to the school, and when schools are back in. So, and by the way, I remember you from Bowman City Schools. I'm the one who got $1 million from Mervo Spiel.
Yes. I love Mervo.
Yeah. I got $1 million from Art Modell and to build that field with the stands.
And so that proves the point that there are right now. When I said I'm happy to see white people in the streets, we're now at a moment. You can ask them for money to buy that book. Don't buy it yourself. Ask those wealthy people to buy that book and get it into the hands of every student, so that Mr. Lloyd can give it to the people he's working with. He's blessed and he's a leader. This young man is going to save a lot of lives. But yes. You can help them, Brother Lloyd, by giving them when your life is in chaos, it's hard to think linearly about how to get out of this situation, as you so articulately say. So this book was inspired by God, I will say that, to help people stay focused on a plan to move forward, one foot in front of the other. It's not that hard, but it's not that difficult once you have a vision of what you want to be. So it talks about purpose, your aptitude, and what you want to do. And so, Brother Lloyd, you can help all those young people you're working with to get hold of their own lives and to see what can be as opposed to what is already. It's hard. I know it's hard, man. It's I see it. I hang out in all those places you talked about, man. I was all down Robinwood and Newtown 19 and Newtown 20. And then my eyes got open and I had an opportunity. So making one opportunity is another opportunity. Keep following opportunities, man, to get out and get up and then come back and help others. I'm sorry.
Help somebody else. That's
you were talking. I'm sorry.
That's the key to go forward. But we do have the opportunity. When I was listening at you talking about your book, we do have the opportunity to ask the philanthropists and the folk who have money, because my kids at Mervo, I was the athletic director, were playing on rocks. The ground every year was rocky. The only place that had a field was Poly. And I asked for $850,000. The cost overrun was $150,000. I got $150,000 from McAllister, who was now literally none of that money touched my hand, but it went straight into. They did that field over in 2 months, turned it back over to me, and the caveat was to ask. Art Modell asked. He was sick. He came in a wheelchair. If the field could be named the Art Modell Field at Mervo. Well, I'm thinking that if I, and a little country girl, could ask for $1 million, then there ought to be some folk on this line that can ask for some serious money to do whatever it is that we need to do to fund a program that systemically will propel the next generation into a different mindset. Because all we're doing, the vision, without a vision, the people perish, yes. And a vision is something that changes your mindset. Your mindset has to be changed. We can't always think that this is, my mom used to always say, you may live in a project, but the projects don't live in you. And I was at Morgan, I finished Morgan 3.5 years. And who would have thought it? Who would have thunk it, as they say? But the fact of the matter is, you if you don't, you don't have because you don't ask. And so I admonish all the people on the line tonight to ask. And we're going to get this book from what was my supervisor when I was working in Baltimore City Schools. And maybe we can just give some out to Baltimore City school students because, you know, they're struggling too. But that's another.
I'll come and speak.
I'm retired now.
I speak to them hoarse. I do it all the time.
Yeah, I'm in Annapolis now for the last 10 years, but I'm just really appalled at what I see as injustice, racial divide. And I was at a meeting at St. John Newman, and I told the people, and this is for everyone on the line, to get this book by Ellis Cose, C-O-S-E. It's called The Black-White Divide. And it was put out before Dr. Michelle Alexander put her book out, The New Jim Crow. And, you know, we systemically have to get information that's going to keep us from going back down that path, because they have a path for us to go down. And a path to, once you get a record, as Brother Lloyd said, once you get a record, there are people still serving jail time for selling marijuana. Once you get a record, then the jobs really close up on you, especially a town small like Annapolis. So we're going to make ourselves a committee of some, and we're going to get a bunch of these books. We're not trying to sustain you, but we're trying to sustain society. Thank you for at least having something that we can put in somebody's hand.
I will share Nathaniel's book with everyone, the title, the complete title. Okay, any other questions for one another? And I don't see, we have no questions on Facebook or YouTube, so I guess it's a busy night. I know there's several other events going on tonight also. I'm sorry, Fred. I didn't see you.
Okay. Mr. Harrington, would you consider coming up sometime and giving a presentation at the Stanton Center? If I can gather the kids in the neighborhood and some of the young people. I mean, you know, some of the things you had to say are not things I often hear. And I'm quite sure that the kids in the Clay Street area particularly don't hear it either.
Of course.
Okay. I mean, I was criticized for what I said a number of times tonight, but the title of this is Where Do We Go From Here? And right here in a number of areas, I'm well aware that some of the things that I said don't really go to the deeper issues of the problem, but where do we go from here? We got a bunch of murders that it's not safe to be in a lot of our projects right now. And, you know, when I say bring the police in and talked about the police, and the first thing we have to do is take care of the immediate law enforcement issues. That's part of where we go from here. But if we don't do that, we don't go anywhere. But you can't do one at a time. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can get to come to Annapolis so that the young people coming out of high schools can see a future for themselves. They will gladly go to a future of hard and honest work where they can make a lot of money, rather than going to a drug organization where they're going to make money. It's very simple. But if Americans haven't seen that you've been privileged over a long time to get where you are.
You know, language is important. Language is important, y'all. We don't call them projects anymore.
Okay, we
don't call them projects anymore. It's 2020. They're not. I mean, the project was a failed project. So we call them
when did you graduate from Annapolis?
Housing.
Could I ask when you graduated from Annapolis High?
1970.
Okay.
Telling your age, man.
It's all right. I feel good. You know, I move up like 25 miles today. You know, I'm staying healthy. I'm trying to go 100, 105 years. This body's supposed to go 100, 110 years. I'm going all the way. God said, ask for what you get. It's all about, as you all say, it's all about your mindset. If you can conceive it, says Jesse Jackson, you can achieve it. Conversely, if you can't conceive it, you cannot achieve it. So it's all here. God gave us this thing. right here. And he made us the only species ever created that we can create our own lives, and we are creating our own lives as we go. And yes, Annapolis is the way it is because it's somebody's design. And it's someone's design because we didn't have a plan. If we don't have a plan, we're working on somebody else's plan. And that's called the private prison system in America that divides the number of students who are failing third grade because they will end up in the private prison system in America. It's abhorrent. It's evil. We need to stop this.
I was just wondering.
Bring industry here.
Could you run any faster than Bill Belichick back then?
Bill Belichick never even played ball. Tell him, Sheila. Bill, he didn't play ball. He was privileged because his daddy was the coach at the Naval Academy. You all know the story. And so that privilege that he had took him all the way. And people are still, having their privilege, and the rest of us are playing ball, making plenty of money. Some of us who make the bigs, but
he just graduated.
I'm well aware of that,
right?
That's right.
I just look at all the success stories that have come out of Annapolis High. I mean, one of whom, several of whom are with us tonight. And, Keith Gross went to the Naval Academy, joined the probably the greatest fighting force in the world, arguably the United States Marines. We have our own Archie Trader, Rodell Wright, Henry Downs, the late Henry Downs. All these guys made successes out of themselves. And I agree. I don't think that the educational system's what it ought to be. I do think that there are vestiges of racism, despite best efforts to do away with that. But there's a thing called individual responsibility. And Mr. Harrington, you talked about that you've got to make up your mind, as did actually Dr. McConnell did too. You make up your mind what you want to do, you set a goal, and you go for it.
But let me say this to you. All that notwithstanding, I listened to a talk today on CNBC because I watch it a lot, and the talk there is how to diversify the Fortune 500 and Black CEOs, the few that exist, and many, many white CEOs have signed a contract to make sure that they have increased Black board members in their organizations within 1 year. It's opportunity, sir. It is not just my aspiration. If I can have all the aspiration in the world, if I go in and apply for a job and he says, no, I'm going to give it to the guy who I know, who's a white guy, I'm not going to get it no matter how smart I am. There's nothing wrong with Mr. Lloyd and his counterparts. They're brilliant people. They need the opportunity to compete. And when they do, they'll outcompete everybody because they know how to survive and they know how to thrive, they know how to think, they know how to maneuver. They just need an opportunity and not be turned down because of the color of their skin.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Alderwoman Finlayson. I thought this was very enlightening. Great job.
Thank you. I think I would like to say to Mr. Lloyd, thank you for joining us this evening. You are the voice of the future. And I think we're on the right path with your leadership. I think someone earlier said, I think it was Dr. McConnell who said, we're all behind you. And we're not only behind you, we're beside you, we're with you. And we are encouraging you to continue. And do know that you've got a support system. You've got your young buddies, but you also have the old folks with you too. So I want to say thank you. And I know you had another engagement this evening, so thank you for staying with us. Your voice resonated loudly and clearly, and I think we've all learned from the message you gave us tonight. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to all of you for sharing your ideas, being forthright with what's good and what's bad. And I hope that you will, when called upon, help us to move beyond where we are today, because it is going to take all of us working together and bringing our different ideas and strategies to get beyond to a better place for all of us. So with that being said, thank you.
Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for your leadership in doing this and keeping it going. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure, but Annapolis is my home, as you know it. And so what goes on here is very important to me, and anything I can do. And with the team like you guys, can't lose. So thank you all. Have a great evening. And please stay tuned. You'll get the notes probably within a few days. Will and I will put our heads together and see what our notes are and send them out to you. And then I'll work with my colleagues on the council to kind of come up with a strategy, a plan with all of the, consolidating all of the ideas into a plan. So, and then you'll hear from me again. So thank you all. Thank you, Julian, for keeping us running tonight. You're a genius, so I appreciate it. So good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Everybody.
Good night, everyone.